Hello again, Conte. I very recently started Monster Hunter Rise. It just came out quite recently, I guess, depending on how quickly I get this video out. But yeah, quite early on, you get access to Critical Eye and Attack Boost on different pieces of armor, which is really nice. It's good to have those options. However, I have noticed that a lot of people are gravitating towards Critical Eye, especially because you can get like 3 points for it really early on. And I just want to explain to especially newer players why that's not a good idea in early game. In late game, this will change, obviously. Like crit meta might still be a thing, but in the early game, it's definitely not a good idea to focus Critical Eye because attack boost is a way more efficient use of your skill points. And yeah, to explain why, I'll need to do a little bit of math. So I just want to point out here in game first that our weapons are roughly in the region of like 90 attack at rare 2, and that's not going to increase by a huge amount super quickly. Yeah, that'll be important in a second, but yeah, let's get into the maths. Now, for anybody who's not particularly interested in the maths, feel free to zone out now. I've already told you, focus, attack, boost, that's all you really need to know. But for a lot of players who are fairly new to the series, like who come over from World and are really used to the crit heavy World meta, I figured I'd run through these calcs because they're kind of like a rite of passage for a lot of Monster Hunter players to go through. They're like Babby's first damage calculation that everybody kind of does. And yeah, so it might be worth paying attention if you want to see the numbers. You can skip forward a couple minutes if you want to see me get to like formulas and explaining why without going through the derivative. But anyway. Yeah, so we're going to assume a 25% crit modifier because we're really early in the game. We don't have crit boost access just yet. And again, this video is geared towards people who are in the early game. But I am going to keep it general as K. And so if you wanted to, you could pop in like a 30% or 35% or whatever it becomes. If you wanted to do your own damage calcs. We're going to have a base affinity of P. This will normally be 0 because most of our weapons have 0 affinity and we don't have like a bunch of points of critical eye already. But again, I'll keep the formulas generic because they are useful just to see derived. And the affinity boost here, this delta P is just like, you know, if you run a point of critical eye, that's 5% extra affinity. This would be 5%. We'll ignore this for just now, and we'll just look at what happens when you add P affinity to a weapon. What does that do to the damage? So if you have like 10% affinity, 10% of the time you'll do 1 plus K, so you'll do 1.25 times the damage. Whereas the other, I forgot what I said P was, but the other percent of the time, you'll just do a modifier of 1 to whatever base damage you were going to do. And so you can work out the expected value statistically by just, you know, timesing the probabilities and the values. And that gives you this 1 plus PK value. Quick sanity check just to make sure that that's correct. If we have, for example, 50% affinity, then this gives us 1 plus 0.5 times 0.25, which is 1.125. And that's kind of what you would expect because, you know, 50% of the time you'll be doing just regular damage, 1. And 50% of the time you'll be doing 25% extra damage, 1.25. And so it averages out to 1.125. And so that's where this formula comes from, 1 plus PK. Now, if you want to incorporate boosting your affinity by a delta P, then you can just put in P plus delta P in for P into this formula. And so we started with 1 plus PK times whatever our base damage was, and that has become 1 plus P plus delta P times K. We've just replaced the probability with P plus delta P. So for example, if it was 50%, it's now 55%. We can work out the percentage difference from between these. We just do the new one, take away the old one, divided by the old one, and that'll give us the percentage increase. That comes down to this formula here, which simplifies nicely into delta P over 1 over K plus P. Now, I am, again, considering early game. I'm not going to worry about crit boost changing this K modifier to like 30% or 35% or whatever. And so for me, K is going to be 0.25. Now, 1 over that is 4, and so the formula becomes this thing up here. Delta P over 4 plus P. So if you had a base affinity of 0, which we will do most of the time, this would just be delta P over 4. But obviously you can put in whatever numbers you want into this formula, and you can put in whatever K value you want into this formula, depending on what armor skills and sets you have access to at whatever stage of the game you're at. So what this gives us is a percentage change in DPS, essentially, or damage dealt over your hits. It is averaged out over an entire hunt. It is possible that even at, you know, 10% affinity, you get really lucky and just get all crits, but we're averaging things out. So we're going to be starting at 0% affinity because that's what most of the weapons start at. No need to worry about, you know, Nagakuga weapons yet if we're so early on in the game. But obviously you can change that if you want. And honestly, if you start at a higher value of P, if you have a higher value of the base affinity, then actually this number is even worse. So we're doing critical eye a favor. We're actually like biasing the numbers towards it by making this assumption. But yeah, so if we look at starting at 0 affinity and putting just a single point of critical eye in, so we can compare 1 point of crit eye to 1 point of attack boost, that gives us 5% boost affinity, or 5% affinity added to our base affinity, and we're starting at 0. Plug that in, you get a 1.25% damage increase, which is fairly small. Now, if you wanted to match this with a single point of attack boost, which gives you +3 attack, you can run the numbers, and it isn't strictly like +3 attack doesn't scale up perfectly like this for all weapons. Like gun launch shelling, I think works differently, and like file damage on charge blade. Anyway, it's close enough for just a general approximation. Yeah, if you wanted to start at a base attack value of X, so for example, we're starting at 90 for most of our weapons. If you add 3 and then divide by the old one to get the percentage increase, and you match that up with the critical eye one, it ends up requiring 240 base attack on your weapon. What this basically means is that any weapon that has a base attack of less than 240, putting in that single point of attack boost is going to be more worthwhile than putting in a single point of critical eye. And because we only have access to a few points of each in the early game, you don't need to worry about how the percentages change. Yeah, and so what this is basically saying is that in the early game, until you start hitting damage numbers on your weapons that are much higher, you really shouldn't be focusing crit. You should be focusing attack boost because it makes a much larger difference. 3 times the difference per point even. Yeah, it's just a way more efficient skill to be investing in. I think that basically covers everything. That's the formula, how it's derived, that's how it's used. This is why attack boost is. Don't take this 242 literally. Literally, it will depend on what other skills you have in your set and other things like base affinity, and it won't make as much of a difference because of like elemental and stuff like that. But it gives you an idea of just how much attack boost outclasses critical eye, especially in the early game when those other factors aren't at play. So yeah, just a quick video. A lot of new players from World don't seem to know some of this stuff, and a lot of the old players from the old games who just didn't do the damage calcs obviously also don't really seem to know it. It's kind of just a thing that got spread around on the GameFAQs forums, years ago. That attack boost is not really worth using. Critical eye is not really worth using early game. But I figured I'd do a video just so that everybody in my audience can see why that's the case, how the numbers work, and how to do those calcs for themselves. Let me know if there are any mistakes here. I probably made some slight mistakes. I don't think they would change the conclusion very much, but I'd be happy to. I'll like pin anything in a pinned comment if there is anything noteworthy. And other than that, you should follow me on Twitch where we've been playing through Monster Hunter Rise. It's been a really good time. I've been enjoying the game a ton. It looks great. It plays great. It's a really good time. So yeah, that my Twitch is in the description, and I'll have it in the pinned comment too. But yeah, so let me know if you have any questions. But otherwise, I hope you have a lovely day and I hope you're having a good time with Rise. Take it easy. Bye bye.